Hey, what's going on, Facebook? Doing another live version today, class number 4, which is Empower Step O, optimize your opportunities for growth. And just to recap for you, some of the things that we've gone over the last couple of days, we went through steps 1 through 3. Step 1, again, is evaluating your expectations by doing 3 things: taking inventory of yourself and your team, doing a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, and then setting up your team for success in the short term and in the long term by evaluating and checking the reasonableness of your expectations. Step 2, of course, is our matrix moments, or our measure their expectations step. Remember that you control your team's perception of success. You structure their reality. It's your job to believe in them, to communicate your trust and your faith in them, and that will set the bar for them and will determine their willingness to live up to tackle the difficult, live up to your expectations, tackle the difficult challenges they have, and to push through the tough tasks they have. Because again, they get their sense of what is good, what is excellent, and what is competent from you. Step 3, we talked yesterday about planning and playing to win, and in the context of proper principles of delegation. So one of the things that we talked about, there's 5 basic principles of delegation. Those principles are clarity, aspiration, inspiration, trust, and ownership. And what we basically talked about in that step, a lot of it is you've got to understand that you have to empower to delegate. You must give up power to gain power. If you empower people, you gain influence over their behavior, over their activities, much more power, much more influence than you would have doing it yourself. As a matter of fact, you gain the ability to influence people by empowering, such that you can influence many instead of controlling a simple few. And that results in a growth of your power and your ability to make big things happen. So the key again there is, if you are not empowering, then you're not really delegating. And so today we want to talk about step number 4, which is optimizing your opportunities for growth. So delegating sounds great and sounds nice, but how do we actually get it done? How does it look in practice, right? And so there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you all about before we really get into the nitty gritty of it, that are just kind of mindset frames that we have to pay attention to. And there's a couple quotes that I want you to hear, all right? The first quote is this: there are no secrets to success. It is the result of preparation, hard work, and learning from failure. Again, that's from former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell. Another quote from Napoleon Hill, the gentleman who wrote Think and Grow Rich, says this: every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seeds of a greater or equal benefit. And the last quote is from H. Stanley Judd, and it says this: don't be afraid to fail. Don't waste energy trying to cover up failure. Learn from your failures and go on to the next challenge. It's okay to fail. If you're not failing, you're not growing. And the reason that I wanted you all to kind of pay attention to these quotes on failure, right, is because our fundamental thoughts about failure have to be challenged if we're going to lead people, if we're going to empower people, right? The whole point is, we in our culture have developed a very toxic relationship with failure. And what I'm going to tell you in this class is that you need, if you're going to be an empowering leader, you need to empower your people to fail early, to fail often, and to fail forward. So let's look at how our culture kind of messes us up with regard to failure. One of the things to pay close attention to is the fact that, most parents, even growing up, most parents focus on what we do wrong and trying to not get us to do wrong. We're taught that failure is bad, and we generally get disciplined for bad behavior. We're told no more as children than we are ever told yes. The focus of parenting generally is prevention, right? Out of a good place. Parents want to make sure that their children are safe enough to get to adulthood where they can make all the mistakes, and that's not the parents' fault, right? But a lot of the parenting methods are based on negative reinforcement and on punishment, right? And we'll talk in the reward chapter about how positive reinforcement is so much better when you're trying to create leaders, when you're trying to create people who take initiative, when you're trying to create or teach people, develop people into the types of people that know what to do. Positive reinforcement is better, but just understand it. We come from a culture that is negatively reinforced in a lot of ways. And that continues in our educational system, right? You go to school, and in most schools, teachers let you know how you're doing by letting you know what you got wrong. You get a test back, and it says minus 13 at the top, right? Minus 20 at the top, minus 25, right? They mark off the numbers that you get wrong. Now, I was a teacher for 6 years. I understand that generally circling all the ones that you got right takes a lot more time. So it's easier to just check off the ones that you got wrong. But here's the key, and here's the point about that. What does it communicate to the student? What does it focus their attention on? It focuses their attention on the failures, the mistakes, right? And it creates a situation where those mistakes are what's keeping you from doing well, right? In our schools, only people who are correct 70% of the time get to pass a class, right? And even to the point of bad behavior, we expel children or suspend children from school for defending themselves in fights, right? Even if they didn't start the fight. So now we're punishing these children for making mistakes of not avoiding somebody else's mistake. And these are the types of things that we are ingraining in our culture, right? This is the same training and same attitude that happens in higher education, right? You get maybe 3 or 4 major opportunities to show a professor that you know what you're doing, that you've learned what's in the class, and it's normally a midterm, a final, and some sort of paper or quiz along the way, right? Those who make the fewest mistakes in college earn the highest prizes, earn the best GPAs, and get the honors at graduation. The conventional idea that we have shaped in our culture is that cream rises to the top. You put pressure on people to figure out who's the best. You try to figure out, you use a weeding out system basically to see who are the people that can survive and that can operate under pressure. And that is a great idea if, again, your job is to determine who's the best. But as leaders, that's not our job. Here's the little secret that I learned when I was a teacher that is kind of interesting. The best students, I wound up having to do the least amount to teach them. I didn't get paid my salary because of the best students. The best students didn't really need me as a teacher because they generally went and did their work on their own. They had all the qualities that they needed, and most they needed me to challenge them. But let's be very clear. I wasn't leading them anywhere. I was at best a helper in their journey. And what you have to understand as an empowering leader is that the people that you lead, the people that you are going to be dealing with, are coming from this culture. They're coming from this background. They're coming from this place of mistakes are bad, and they're not comfortable making those mistakes, right? And if you remember what we talked about in the last class, we talked about the zero defect mentality and how even in the great producers, even in the students that get into Harvard Law School or the students that get into Yale or to Ivy League schools, what this zero defect mentality does is it creates for them a sense of relative deprivation. When you have this idea that you shouldn't be making mistakes, the slightest mistake can make a straight A student feel like they're a failure. And I heard somebody say this one time, failing is temporary. Failure is permanent. And the perception is, am I a failure or did I fail at something? To be able to understand that you may have failed at something is a very different distinction than being a failure. And what I want you to understand is that when you create a zero defect culture in your workspace or with your people, what you do is you inherently begin to tell people that they're failures when they make mistakes. And that's what we cannot do, because success is built on failure. Success is built on learning from our mistakes. We as human beings are pattern recognition specialists. And here's the interesting thing about patterns. The way that you distinguish patterns is you have to have a pattern interrupt. If you just saw the color blue over and over and over and over and over and over again, you would never be able to understand what blue was. It's only when you see yellow, red, green that you can distinguish blue from those other ones. So our ability to be good at something is based on our ability to do it wrong and to recognize the difference between the two. How do babies learn to walk? They fall a lot, and then they learn how to balance. How did you learn how to talk? You said a whole bunch of words that weren't right, and you learned, and you watched people's reactions, and you figured out your communication skills. You have to understand that success is built on failure, and that if you are going to be a true empowering leader, if you're going to create leaders, you're going to have to create an environment where it's safe for your people, not only to make mistakes, but to be open about those mistakes so that you can help them to learn from them. And then the second point to that is you're going to have to create an environment where it is expected that people will make mistakes. It is expected that things won't work out the way that they thought that they were going to work out. And then what they do next is going to be crucial. The fact that you are going to encourage your people to figure out how to solve the problem, that you're going to encourage your people to, when they recognize that something isn't working, that they are going to look at something else and try something else. And that they may come to you for advice, but that they're actually going to be responsible for figuring it out. That is when you can create an environment where your people can do great things. That is when you are going to optimize your opportunities for excellence. That is when you're going to optimize your people's skills. That is when you're going to optimize their creativity. You're going to maximize on all of the strengths that they have, the reasons that they're on your team. Because when you take away their fear of failure, when you take away their desire to not disappoint you, right? What you unleash in them is their ability to focus on doing great. When you take away their feeling of not wanting to lose, you free them to try to win and to try to win extraordinarily. And how do you get to this point? How do you get to the point where you're able to let your people know that? I know for me, like I told you before, I'm still a recovering perfectionist. I dealt a lot with wanting everything to be perfect and having to, cross T's, dot I's, do all the rest of that. And even it began to even affect my family because I became a workaholic in that I would stay at work late, making up for other people's mistakes and trying to figure out how to make everything perfect because I wasn't comfortable with making mistakes because I came from that school, right? I went to high school. I went to college. I graduated. I got my master's degree. I went to law school and I had done well. And I felt like I did well in the times when I didn't make mistakes. When I made mistakes, it was a different story. I didn't feel good about myself. I felt like a failure. And here was something, it was a pivotal moment in my life. And one of my mentors, I was at a conference and he said this. He said that done is better than perfect. And it took a while for that to settle in, but it was like a light bulb happened. My mind was blown. And again, he said, done is better than perfect. And that was so crucial for me, especially from who this was coming from. This was coming from a mentor of mine in real estate, named Dan Merrill. And if you don't know who Dan Merrill is, he is the CEO and the co-founder, co-creator of Fortune Builders, multi-millionaire, went to Yale University, graduated, played football, went and played for the Chicago Bears and a couple other professional football teams. And then he built a phenomenal real estate enterprise that is still doing great things and building and growing today. And one of the things that he explained was that he struggled as well with analysis paralysis and trying to make everything perfect. And what he realized was that done is better than perfect because it's only when you get something done that you can truly have the perspective that you need to be able to make improvements, right? And you see this in engineering, right? When when they're trying to create something, you have to have a prototype so that you can figure out what works and what doesn't. When something's just in your head, when it's just an idea, that's all that it is. And you only have the perspective of it in your head. But when you create it, when you do it, when you put it out there, now you can actually look at it and determine whether or not it works. And this is important, not just for your people to understand, but for you to understand. Your systems and your processes for your people are not going to be perfect in your head. Done is better than perfect because done can be improved upon. The idea can never be improved upon until you actually make it happen. So what we have to realize is that our jobs as leaders is to change the paradigm of perfection and failure is bad. We have to change that paradigm for our people. If we can change that paradigm for our people, then we create the space for them to manifest their greatness. If we can open up and give them permission to make mistakes, then we can focus on helping them to achieve their greatness. Now, be clear here that when I'm talking about creating an environment where failure is okay, I'm not talking about that every failure is equal, right? There's a particular type of failure. There's failure that comes from a legitimate attempt, pure intention, and work ethic. Now, if somebody is failing because they're not putting forth the effort, things of that nature, that's the easy situation to deal with. That's the person that gets a couple of performance reviews and then they wind up getting fired because they're not putting forth the effort to maintain their spot on the team. Those aren't the people that we're talking about. If you remember in a couple of talks ago, I talked about the difference between competency and excellence. The competency level, most of your people are there, otherwise you would fire them already. That's not really what, my clients don't come to me because they have competency issues with their people. They have people that they know are competent and that are actually trying, but there's some sort of disconnect and they just never get to where they want them to be. That's what we're dealing with right now. And so here's the basic idea. What you have to understand about opening that space for your people to fail is that it opens the space for them to try hard. It opens the space for them to not feel so let down because you're expecting them to fail. You're expecting them to learn from it, and it becomes part of the natural process, right? And I want you to think back to whenever you've seen little kids learn how to walk or learning how to ride a bike. When they fall down, what does everybody say? That's okay. Come on, get back up. Let's go, right? Nobody says, "Oh, you failed. You got to watch out. You got to make sure you don't do this." Right? You don't start telling them how to walk. You just encourage them to keep trying. They're going to figure it out, right? And here's the key about making that environment on your team. Failing forward helps everyone, including you. By creating that culture of learning from failure, what you allow for is for you not to be perfect as a leader and it to be okay. And when your people fail, you learn a little bit more. They learn from each other. They share, they cross pollinate, if you would, and you learn more about your systems and places where you might need to change your systems. Creating a culture of learning from failure leads to synergistic exponential growth. So how does it do that? All right. Well, traditional management systems generally checking in or, checking up on your subordinates is about the manager. It's about the supervisor feeling good that the work is actually going to be done, right? And remember this, we talked about this before, the sense of a manager is that they're responsible for the work, whereas a leader understands that they're responsible for the people that do the work. And the same principle applies in how you supervise. What we do is we check in and we want to make sure that our people aren't feeling micromanaged and that we're not checking in with them so that we can feel good, right? But here's the elephant in the room, of course. The reason you're checking in is because you don't have the trust built up with your people. And I want you to know that that's okay. You don't have to trust completely that your people are doing what they're supposed to be doing in order to make this work. What you do need to do is trust your process. And one of the reasons that you trust your process is because your process plans for failure, and it plans to use failure to get to success. Your process doesn't need failure to be or doesn't need to be perfect in order to be successful. And because of that, you have more freedom to check in an empowering way with your people. And here's the key about empowering check-ins. They can't be too frequent. There isn't a micromanaging aspect of checking in. It's actually enhancing your trust, your care, and your compassion for your people, letting them know that you are paying attention to what they're doing, letting them know that you're there for them if they need you, and letting them know that you're watching. But from a good place, from a helpful place, from a team building place, from a I believe in you and I trust in you, but I want you to know that if you need anything, I'm here place. Not a place where you're checking in to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Right? Remember this quote: we manage things, we lead people. Okay? And so some of the other things that you want to do with your check-ins is you want to make sure that you plan them in advance. You should have questions that are designed to lead your employees to the questions that they need to answer rather than telling them what they need to do. You want to engage them in the process. Remember, empowerment is about giving ownership over of the process, of the results, of the failures, of the mistakes, of everything to your people, and enlisting them in the process of fixing whatever needs to be fixed. And the key point to this, the key where you gain so much from this is by minimizing fear of failure, you allow your team to maximize the second try. And in my book, I tell a story about my experience in grad school, and I'll give you kind of shortened version here. Basically, high school and in college, I was a last minute, all night studier. I could stay up and write a paper, 5 pages, 10 pages, whatever, and pull an all nighter, right? And I convinced myself that this was when I did my best work. But of course, that was mainly because I didn't look at the entirety of my work, right? For the papers that I wrote, they were very good. But what about the papers that I didn't write because I knew I was going to do less than my best and I didn't want to turn in anything or I wasn't inspired. So I just didn't turn stuff in. That type of an attitude of perfect or bust led me to a 2.4 GPA graduating from college. And I felt demoralized. I felt horrible about how I had taken that time. Now, to give you an understanding of why I'm saying that, I got a B plus in a class where I didn't turn in a paper that was 10% of my grade. Had I just turned in the paper, I would have gotten an A. Even if I'd have gotten a 50% on the paper, I would have still gotten an A. But this system that I had was very poor at building and producing sustainable work. What I realized when I went to grad school was that waiting to the last minute was not a very good system, right? Even though it could work when everything worked perfectly, it didn't work consistently enough to produce good results. So then I changed it. In grad school, I made myself a strict rule. I finished every paper that I had to write 3 days before it was due. Then I took a day off, didn't look at it, didn't do anything with it. And then the next day I went and I reviewed it. I proofread it. I changed grammatical stuff and everything. And then I turned it in that day, a day before we do. So I turned every paper in a day early and I was done with them in my situation 3 days early. What I noticed in that time period, over grad school, course of grad school, I had 13 classes, 11 A's, 2 B's. I can tell you the stories about the B's, but suffice to say, I didn't follow the program, right? But in every class that I got an A in, those 11 classes I got A's in, I followed this system. And in following this system, there were a number of things that wound up happening. Number one, I realized that the work that I did early was pretty good work, but I also was able to find so many more things that were mistakes or that were not in the place that they were supposed to be. And I was able to improve my papers so much so that I got rave reviews from my professors when I turned them in. I also felt very good about the work. I never turned in a paper where I felt like, I'm not sure what the professor's going to think about this. I knew when I had an A paper in my hand because I had had the time to do it. And so the key thing about this process is done is better than perfect. And as long as you have a system in place that allows you to perfect done, it takes away the stress and the anxiety when you're doing the first draft. It allows you to just operate, to just get it done. And that creates a much less stressful situation, a much less stressful environment for your team. And in less stress, your team will produce more and will fall into their strengths and maximize their abilities. You have to leave room for your people to fail, but you also have to leave room for you to fail. And having a system that has room for these check-ins and has, earlier deadlines and plans for and expects failure, it does this other thing for you. It allows room for you to not be clear. It allows room for you to make mistakes in the first 3 steps of our process, right? It allows room for you to grow as a leader. During your process of working with your people, you should learn just as much as they do. You should learn more about your processes and what it takes to get things done, about the different ways that you can get things done. Your mind should be open to the possibilities because every person that you work with is a different person and therefore alerts you to different ways other than the ways that works for you to get things done. That makes you a better leader. It makes you more accessible to more people. And so, again, minimizing fear of failure and demonstrating a lack of fear of failure in your humility, in your interactions with your team, creates a situation where you can actually optimize your opportunities for growth. And so the one last thing that I want to talk about as we close out this class is energy and time efficiency, right? And the biggest thing is when you look at this method, it seems like, and when you read through the book, you'll see in the chapter, there's a number of quality control check-ins and different things that you do to check in, right? And it seems like when you read over it, that it will actually seem more laborious and take more time. But guess what? That's not true, right? And I'll tell you that in the beginning, this method does take just as long as the others, right? And I give an example in the book, and you'll see this. Because you're doing these check-ins, they take less time than traditional counselings and everything, but you do them more often. And so when you're doing these things, it will indeed, in fact, take about the same amount of time originally. However, as you get more proficient and as you create this culture with your team of being more open to failure, of allowing them to learn from their mistakes, both you and your team will get better about recognizing potential mistakes before they even happen, right? You will also get better at pointing out to each other the places where they might need to think this and need to think that. And here's the key. Your people will get better at being proactive about their job. They'll get better at anticipating the questions that you're going to ask. And ultimately, they'll start to point out and to correct things that you would normally have to correct, that you would normally have to deal with. And here's the key. They're going to start even beginning to develop solutions that you would have never thought about on your own. And this is the place where leadership really gets fun. So to recap, in optimizing your opportunities for growth, you want to change your team's idea about failure, and you want to create more opportunities for discourse, more opportunities for conversation about how to learn from those mistakes. You want to make sure that they understand that done is better than perfect. And you want to make sure that you create a culture where they're expecting not to have a perfect plan. They're expecting for things to go wrong, and they're expecting to learn from those things. But they're expecting to get things done and to be proactive and be involved in it. They're not waiting for you to tell them where they've messed up. You're not indispensable in the process. You are a helper in the process. And therefore, they take a larger role and take more ownership of what they have to do. So next time, we're going to discuss some practical application supervision tips in our next step, step 5, which of course is our watch and learn step, where we're going to talk about where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be doing when you're supervising, and more importantly, what you shouldn't be doing, where your team doesn't need you and where you need to extricate yourself from the situation. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that this series is helping you to learn and to understand the key thing about leadership and about being an empowering leader is remembering, of course, that you are working to be the type of leader that creates other leaders. You are not just trying to give a person a fish. You are not just trying to teach a person to fish. You're trying to create an environment where not only do you teach people to fish, but you teach them how to teach people to fish. Because in that way, not only do you feed the person, but you can feed the world. So have a great weekend. Remember, as you're thinking about everything that you're doing, to think, how does this impact? How does this help? How does this influence your leadership legacy? And remember to live every day like it was on purpose. Have a wonderful day.